Welcome to Small Talk Podcast. This is Taxed and Relaxed with Rachael from Chadwick Accountants.
Welcome to Taxed and Relaxed episode 23. I'm your host, Rachael Chadwick Harrison. I'm here with my producer, Natalie Luckett from Small Talk Podcast. And I have a very special guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself, Annie?
I will. My name is Annie Richardson and I'm an executive coach and run my own coaching and leadership company.
Could you start off for our listeners how you get into such a role?
Oh, wow, gosh. A big question. So, I had a corporate career of over 25 years before I went into my own coaching business. And that's been running now for 20 years. So 20 years ago, coaching was really just on the sort of inception of taking off. It was a new thing.
Can I just interrupt you there quickly? When you said you were in a corporate career before, were you doing coaching in that career?
Oh, no. I was a regional director of housing at one point. Then I became a principal consultant in leadership and management in one of the largest IT companies at the time, which was ICL, and then became Fujitsu. And then I took a severance from that and set up my own coaching and leadership company.
So what you were doing was building all those skills that you would need in this business.
Yeah. If I reflect on my career, I had some great highs, and I'd also have what I consider were not such, lows. And I think one of those was actually working in the large corporate space of what was ICL Fujitsu in a principal consultant's role. And even though it wasn't my favourite role, I learnt so much in those corporate corridors. It was all smoke and mirrors and big offices. And that's where I really cut my teeth, if you like, on understanding leadership. And at that time, anyone, and today, anyone can call themselves a coach. If anyone is considering getting a coach, I would say the first question is, can you tell me what qualifications you've got? And some might say, well, it's the qualification of life. And of course,
that old classic.
Of course, there's an element of that with me. I studied for a whole year with the Oxford School of Coaching and Mentoring, became professionally qualified, got the, if you like, degree equivalent in that discipline, and then did lots of my own professional development in psychometrics, NLP, you name it, I did it. But for me, that was about getting the professionalism and to be the best possible coach I could be. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I think for our listeners, it would be great if you could explain, what does an executive coach do?
Well, this is very simple, because this is the question you're asked when you're out at dinner or you're meeting some friends. He's like, so what do you do? And basically I say, I'm an executive coach, and you sort of get this look of, so what does that mean?
Exactly.
So it's very easy. I help bosses become better bosses.
And do you think every business needs an executive coach?
Well, it's interesting you say every business. I might not say the business needs it. I'd probably say the leaders. And not every leader, but there will be in people's careers times when they need it more than they don't. So a very simple way of describing, so what do I work with when I work with a leader in an organisation? Well, if you can imagine, when you start a career, if you imagine the capital letter T, the vertical of that T is when you learn your trade. So you learn to be an accountant. You've
Correct.
got all the account.
I really hope so at this point.
That's your technical excellence. And I know, Rachael, that the point that you then started your own business, and even perhaps before that when you were working in other companies, you needed more than just your technical skill of being an accountant, because you needed to know how to deal with people. It's like, so the horizontal of the capital T is when the leadership or the management kicks in, and it's all of a sudden you need more than just the technical knowledge. You've got to have the interpersonal skills. You've got to understand how to give and receive feedback. You've got to understand emotional intelligence, all of this stuff. And, and I've had people in very senior positions in very large corporate organisations say, nobody told me, Annie, that I'd need all this as well as the other stuff.
You're so right. And I've said it plenty of times. I see it in public bodies, councils, etc., where I see people who are very good at what they do and they get promoted into a role that they're no good at Because what their new role is, managing the people that did their job before. And they may know the job they did before very well, but they might not be very good at managing people.
Exactly.
And then they don't want to take the salary cut, and they don't want to take the pride dip of going back down, but that job is just not right for them. And you're setting people up for failure.
Well, it's often called that people are promoted to the level of incompetence.
So true. so true.
And you know, one of the reasons why perhaps most corporate organisations might get me in to work with a senior leader, it may, because obviously they're growing their leadership skills, but it may also be because their boss isn't that great at leading. And it's how that person navigates the interaction and the day-to-day with that boss who perhaps isn't very good at it. There's a little diagram that I often share with sort of leaders as they're growing their career, which is, you know, when you're hired for your technical excellence, whatever that is. And the first promotion you probably get is probably where you're working in a team of maybe 1, 2, 3 people. And you are probably still very much day to day the technical expert in whatever your skill is.
You're the senior in the team.
Yeah. And that's quite a comfortable place to be because you know what everyone's doing, you all know your skill, it's great. And then you may get promoted again, and now you're not just in a small team of 2 or 3, you now may be leading a team of maybe 10.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you're leading that type of team, all of a sudden you can't know everything that everyone in that team is doing, and you certainly can't do it. And if you like, being prepared to give up that being the technical expert is very difficult for some people, because all of a sudden you've got to delegate.
So we're tipping into control territory and losing control, and that's not a comfortable position for many people.
No. It's how you manage across with your peers. As their leader, as the head of this organisation, one of the key foundation things that you have to build with your team is trust. You need to trust them and they need to trust you. It has to be a mutual thing. And that's how, you know, in my line of work, we often talk about team dynamics, you know, and there's a lovely piece about the 5 dysfunctions of a team, you know. Trust is the basis, because the absence of trust means the fear of conflict. Because you don't trust people, so you're not going to get into conflict. And if there's no conflict, there's no discussion. And people might think, well, why do you want conflict in an organisation? Well, conflict, you know, it's one of those words that we assume is negative.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be. It's a discussion. And if you're not prepared to share a different point of view, the organisation really isn't going to grow or go anywhere very quick.
No, you're just another cog in the system.
Yeah. One of my other favourite words that's got a natural negative connotation, I know we've spoken about this, Rachel, is the word feedback.
Yes. Constructive criticism.
You know, I feel sorry for feedback. It gets a tough gig because feedback is neutral. You can have positive feedback, you can have, if you want to call it, developmental feedback. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is, though, that most people don't know how to give it, and they certainly don't know how to receive it.
The British in particular.
Yeah.
They're awful at receiving good feedback.
Yeah. There's a discussion, there's a dialogue about it, what you know, what the situation was, what actual behaviour happened and what the impact was. What most people, leaders, business leaders, whatever, miss is that when you're giving someone some great feedback, they've done something really well, you should pay just as much attention to the detail. So, hey Rachel, that meeting that you just were in, you handled that great. And you say, oh, thank you. But you don't know how you handled it, what was particularly great.
What did I do that was so great that I can repeat?
Yeah, whereas if the leader would say, Rachel, you know, I really liked your attendance in that meeting because what I really noticed is you brought everyone in, you gave them a chance to speak and you really listened to what was being said.
And then that person can repeat that.
Exactly. Feedback, you know, it's not just receiving it, it's giving it as well. Two-way street.
Very much is. Going back to what you said about trust, and how it's the foundation of all relationships, you could say, to be fair, both personal and workplace. How do you, or can you, rebuild trust?
Now, that's a good question. It's really interesting. When I think about when I'm facilitating with groups of leaders, and I sort of say, okay, what are the what are the rules of engagement or whatever. If they don't mention it, could we be honest? Could we be honest and truthful? And they'll go, oh yeah, of course.
I like to say, be transparent with me.
But I always then say to them, do you say exactly what's on your mind or not? Yeah. So these are all sort of trust, honesty, transparency. There are no clear boundaries of delineations of how much trust or how much honesty. It is something that people need to feel their way with whoever's around them, because some people can be more open and transparent and honest than others, and some want more than others.
And some want less. They need it wrapping up a little bit for them. And
Yeah. And how do you rebuild it? Well, I think you've got to have an element of honesty, of hands up if excuse my language, if you screwed up, are you prepared to admit that? And I often say to leaders and to leaders of businesses, a great strength can be how vulnerable you are prepared to be. And that often gets a raised eyebrow, and they sort of say, you mean you need me to be vulnerable? Because it's about how are you prepared to admit your mistakes? Because no one's perfect.
There's something powerful, though, about owning your mistakes, I think, and saying, my God, I've made a mistake.
Yeah.
I didn't do this, and I should have done this.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, and I will do this to put it right. And I think that does make a difference in leaders.
It's taking ownership and taking responsibility.
Do you think that perhaps some people can learn these attributes, or do you think this is something instilled when you're younger?
Now then. So that brings me on to an interesting topic called emotional intelligence.
Very hot topic at the moment, to be fair.
There are, and there's a lovely load of research, and a particular psychometric, which was developed by Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis, who were 20 years ago some of the founders in emotional intelligence. And they have a psychometric which splits emotional intelligence into 4 quadrants. So it's quite simple. Which is, the first quadrant is, how self-aware are you? Second quadrant is, are you able to manage yourself? And of course you can't manage yourself unless you have self-awareness. Then the third quadrant is, how aware of others are you?
How will they react?
Yeah.
Tailoring your approach to them.
Exactly. And then the fourth quadrant is how you interact and manage that relationship with others. So it's simple. Awareness of self, management of self, awareness of others, management with others. And obviously within each of those 4 quadrants there are different attributes under each one. Conflicts, managing, disagreements, coaching, mentoring, they're all aspects of emotional intelligence. And Daniel Goleman has a great saying, which is, we're talking about technical excellence further on. When we're hired into an organisation, we're hired for our IQ. Certainly in this country, you go through school, then you go through university or some form of higher level of qualification. So we're being sort of filtered all the time into this getting smaller and smaller pool of excellence, and then we're hired by a company to do a certain role. And we're probably in a company with people who perhaps have got very similar IQs to us, because we've all gone through that same process of systemization of, IQ, etc. And so then there's the interesting question. So if in an organisation you're now in a pool, swimming in that pool where pretty much everyone is similar to you in terms of IQ and their qualifications,
The technical abilities.
what makes the chosen few, whoever those are, what makes them the leaders as opposed to just being one of the many? And Daniel Goleman would say it's their EQ, it's their emotional intelligence. So IQ without emotional intelligence, you probably still do a good job, but you probably won't go into leadership, because you need to have the self-awareness and the awareness of others and the management of those to actually get the best for the organisation and get the best for you. and it can be learnt. That is the great thing. Emotional intelligence can be learnt. It isn't an IQ, you're born with a certain IQ or not. You can learn to pay attention to the things that, if you like, are important in emotional intelligence.
I hear what you're saying about EQ and that it can be learned, but is it just more natural for some people than others? Will it ever become natural for them, or will it always be an active, conscious thought that they have to put so much more effort into every meeting and conversation than others?
We all have preferences and we all have comfort zones, and we all operate patterns, and these patterns are things that we've learnt from experience throughout our lives. And depending on what experiences we've had and what's worked for us and what hasn't, that forms part of our pattern of how we operate in the world. I know one that we've used together, Rachael, Myers-Briggs, just taking one of the facets on those, which is extrovert versus introvert. Nothing to do with confidence, but the dimension is about where people focus and get their attention from. And if someone focuses on the external and gets energy from being around other people, they potentially will have more interactions with people. So they potentially could have the opportunity to learn more about interactions with people and have experiences, and therefore, based on those experiences, build their own sort of comfort zone of how they deal with things. The other end of that dimension in extrovert, as I said, was introvert. And introvert isn't that they don't have confidence. Someone who has a preference for introversion is someone who actually tends to focus more on their internal world and actually gets energised from taking their self away from people to, I just need some time on my own, and they get energised by that. Neither one is right or wrong, it's just a preference.
So tell us, Annie, when you meet a new client, do you have the same approach with everyone, or do you have to tailor it to the client?
I always meet a client, whoever they are, with who I am. I don't try and change who I am at all. When I work with that person, as I get to know more about them, I start to understand where their boundaries are. I start to understand what they may or may not be protecting for themselves. And based on that, I make choices about where to push and where to perhaps dig a little deeper. Of course, that is guided by also what they've come to me saying they want to work on. For example, very simplistically, someone says, Annie, I really want to work on my delegation skills. I just want to be in control of everything. And so we work on what are some, if you like, models for delegation. We work on ways of building trust. Can fall under the category, very simply, of mentoring. Mm-hmm. I'm giving them models, I'm giving them approaches, because in all my leadership work, I'm dealing with those all the time. And then some of it can come much more under the area of coaching, which is where maybe I'm pushing and challenging and actually asking questions of, so what causes you to do that? So if you weren't to do that, what bad thing would happen?
What would be your approach to helping someone who's hit a plateau or just lost motivation?
If we take they've lost motivation, it could be for many, many different reasons. And when I work with someone, I'm not just working on what they do, their job, if you like. I'm working on the whole person. And so they may have lost their motivation. Could be a health reason, could be a time of life, it could be the responsibilities they've got in the family, it could be a relationship issue they've got with their partners.
Could be something completely outside of work.
Yeah, and and people might think, well, hang on, as an executive coach, aren't you going to be based purely on the work issues? What's happening in somebody's life is going to spill out in professional and personal. In the same way as, I'm sure some partners say, oh gosh, my partner's having a tough time at work, and don't I know it because they're bringing it home. It's about understanding what's caused the motivation to plateau or whatever. Maybe they need a challenge. Maybe they're not being pushed enough. Maybe they need to do something else. I don't know. It could be anything. And I don't need to know what the reason is. It's about me exploring with them to find out what their reason is. I might be able to have some assumptions, and I might have some questioning sort of angles. And at the end of the day, it will be them that realises, or they that decides, they that become aware of, so what is it that's causing them to have a lack of motivation? What is it that's taking their drive away? Well, the journey is both of us, or certainly most important, they find out what it is. And then also it's really interesting, and this has been based on a few very senior people I've been working with recently. It's almost like they're a bit frightened. Can they do this? Are they good enough?
What happens if I fail?
Yeah, what happens if I fail? And I have some wonderful searching questions. Well, the one searching question that I often use is, get over yourself, it's not all about you. Because people are so concerned about, I do. But other people aren't bothered. They're more concerned about themselves. So get over yourself, it's not all about you. What if you are enough just as you are? What if you can do this? What if you have all the resources you need? What if you can succeed? Are people more afraid of failure, or sometimes are they more afraid of success? Because success means you have to stick your head above the parapet. You have to take those choices and chances. There are some generic things, personal relationships, leadership, all that stuff is consistent and is very similar. I think a new challenge right at the moment is just the speed of IT support, the speed with which things are changing. But then you go back 20 years and people were saying everything's changing and moving so quick. But it is, I think there's something to do with AI, artificial intelligence, and some of the strides forwards that are being made, that can be very challenging for some people in corporate careers, because they haven't quite got their head around it yet. And I don't think we as a society, as a have got our head around exactly, what the internet and AI can do for us, both positively and negatively. It's, there are some fabulous things it can do. There's also some bloody awful things it can do. And that constant change and that constant pressure, the reasons for the change and the reason for the pressure are very pertinent to the time that it's happening, but the general thing of change and pressure has been around for ages.
I would love to hear, if you can without breaking confidentiality, some success stories where you felt you've gone in and really changed someone that's impacted on the company.
The challenge to being a coach is that once you start working with someone, it's not very often that the company keeps you involved about what's going on.
Right,
so
of course.
There isn't always, because obviously if I'd charge a retainer for that. What does happen though is that a lot of my clients will get connected to me by LinkedIn. And what's really great is that I perhaps have worked with someone and I see that they've then been promoted.
And you think they must be doing a good job.
And then I see that then they've been promoted, and then that they've moved to another company.
There's one question I've been desperate to ask, and I left it till last because it's the one I'm most interested in. Is there any way you can tell whether a leader is good rather than great? Are there any attributes?
Oof. Gosh, so once again, if we were in a coaching session, I'd say to you, Rachel, so what's the difference between good and great? They're two words from the English language. But what you think is good, or the definition of good, may not be the same definition that I have as good. So hypothetically then, what would we say was good? Good was somebody who is doing a good job, is fulfilling their KPIs, their whatever it is they're meant to do, is meeting their targets if it's sales or whatever. So that's someone who's doing a good job. And we could then similarly say, well, okay, so what's great? So great is someone who exceeds those things.
Correct, they're doing
they're doing it even better and exceeding targets if that's a part of their role. So can I tell if someone has the potential to be a good leader or a great leader? Well, this is a personal view. A long time ago, there used to be something called, and it probably still is around, a 9-box grid, where organisations would look at their employees and say, okay, where do they fit on this 9-box grid? And the vertical axis would be about, somebody who is achieving everything, has got high performance. And perhaps then the horizontal would be someone who, their view of potential.
And they plot them on the graph.
And they plot them. So, ideally, everyone would want their people, or most people would want to be put in the box, the ninth box, which is the top of the performance scale and the top of the potential scale.
But how can you get any farther?
Well, it's because, hey, that's where they want to be. And the reality is in organisations, you don't need everyone to be the top performers and whatever. But, it's about how you measure that. And I think there are times in people's careers where perhaps they might have just been promoted or something, and others could judge them in a way or measure them in a way that says, okay, their performance is okay because they've just been promoted to your job, but I don't see they've got any more potential. And the thing that I don't think that judgment is necessarily right or wrong. What I definitely hold dear is that's that judgment at that time. And just because on that judgment at that time that person has been graded as low on potential, that doesn't mean that in 12 months' time or 2 years' time that they will still be low on potential. Because maybe once they've started to do this new role, take on the new responsibilities, that's when they really start to get the motivation and the motoring again.
They may be in a section of the company that's not for them and move sections and it changes. So,
and my belief and the thing that supports me in my coaching, and it is a belief, my belief is that potential is infinite. We all have infinite potential.
Final question for our interview, Annie.
Okay.
If you weren't coaching, what would you be doing?
Oh, if I wasn't coaching, I don't know. I find everybody fascinating, so if I wasn't coaching, gosh, I don't know. I really don't know.
But it's great to know that you're doing the job that you love.
Oh, totally.
There's nothing better than when someone says, what's your dream job? You're like, well, I do it.
Well, I get the joy of waking up every morning, and please take this with a pinch of salt, and with a view to think, where do I get to play today?
Annie, it's been an absolute pleasure, as it always is whenever we meet. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I really hope our listeners have got some really insightful information.
I hope so too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Get involved by emailing me with your questions to podcast@chadwickaccountants.co.uk, and I will do my best to answer them week by week. Until next time, put the kettle on, relax, and remember, you've got this.
You have been listening to Taxed and Relaxed, a Small Talk podcast production.